Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday, the day that's almost Friday, but not, right? Um, so, yeah, okay. Um, what we were talking about yesterday, of course, was sexism, and we watched a little video, a short documentary that talked about what stood in the way of women being equal, women being equal to men. I'm just going to say hello to people who are here very quickly before I forget. So Clara's here, hello Clara, and Miles is here, hello Miles, and John is here, good morning John, as is Sala, good morning Sala, and good morning Adel, and good evening to you Vicky, and hello to you Mike, good morning. You have a lovely cat there. Daniel, good morning Daniel, or good evening Daniel. Good morning Faye. Mike is here, good morning Mike. And Zion is here, good morning to you. And Canon is here, hello. And Gabrielle is here, hello Gabrielle. And Sam is here, good morning to you Sam. Okay. Right, so we watched a little documentary. 4 young women were kind of interviewed in terms of what their lives were like and how they kind of felt, what was their experience as a girl or as a young woman in society. Hello, George. Smart ass. um, and so, what kind of messages did we say were being circulated in these societies very quickly?
Only men can be the provider.
Right, so we definitely heard about men kind of traditionally being thought of as the provider, right? And so men felt some either pressure to do that or felt threatened by women who might be able to earn more than they can. What else did we hear? Social messages. That was
If you don't want to be assaulted, then you do not. You have to not wear makeup and dress what you want.
right. We heard a few examples of women being responsible for men's sexual behavior, right? So how women acted, how they dressed, how they made up themselves, how they acted, those things were seen as sorry, we had a meeting last night. We had a big like society meeting, and it went for 2.5 hours. Went till about 9:30 or so, and so I'm still a little shell shocked from that. Yeah, well, yeah, because our this is an aside. Sorry, people. Our
Had to get it out.
I just had to get it out. Yeah. So the college here is a democracy, right? And so there's no owner in the Grand Caymans, making lots of money off of all of us. It's kind of it exists as it's a nonprofit charitable organization, and so the employees are members of the society, and so we control it. We choose what to do with it, and so every once in a while we have these every three times a year we have these meetings, and we kind of vote on things that need to be voted on, and the principal and the vice principal kind of say how the college is doing and what's happening, and so it's kind of a big thing, and it went a little longer than I expected last night, and so I'm still tired. Sorry. But anyway, enough about that stuff. Right. So we heard in a couple ways how women were often made responsible for men's sexual behavior. Right. Their sexual behavior was, or how women presented themselves was. God, why can't I say this, Anna? What am I trying to say?
It's like their responsibility. They can't wear whatever they want because men perceive it as something wrong.
Right. So we heard that with we heard that with Lulu, right? We heard that with the boys in the alleyway. We heard that with kind of Shui Shui giving her mom was kind of giving her the sex talk sort of thing. But again, are boys getting the same kind of talk given to them? So yeah, women were made responsible for men's behavior toward them. What else did we hear or see?
You have to act out their gender roles according to their culture. So, and I forgot what her name was, but she's not allowed to play sports like
Mira.
basketball, like her brother
Right. So we see that all cultures have defined gender roles, right? What men are supposed to be, what women are supposed to be, and both genders are kind of encouraged to follow those roles, right? And so Mira from Jordan, she reports that there are, certain things that she can't do or she kind of requires her dad's permission for, and so she kind of felt that that was limiting in some ways, right? Especially when contrasted with her brother Saad, who seems to do whatever he pleases, right? Whether that's true or not, I guess we will never know, but that's what's presented to us. What else do we hear? Messages about men and women.
Men think that they should be needed.
Yeah, I kind of added that in, right? Is that men often want to feel needed because our socialization tells us that we are, right? So tells us that we do need to provide for our wives and our family, and we do need to protect them from the big bad outside world, right? And so men are kind of socialized to believe that they are needed, and so they often want to be, right? And they're worried that if they're not needed, then what are they kind of good for, right? And that young man in Lesotho, when the Shway Shway's talking with some of her classmates, he kind of says that very thing, right? He's like, well, if I'm not the provider, like what good am I, right? And that's a very reasonable question based on the social messages that he's receiving and that men receive in many cultures, right? So he's not alone in that young man. What else?
Stereotype of girls playing hard to get.
Right, we heard a little bit of, because Lulu got kind of, was it Lulu? Yeah, Lulu was kind of stuck in that, in kind of a no-win situation, right? If she was, if she chose to be sexually active, then she, is slut-shamed for that. And if she chooses not to be, well, she's, something else, right? She's a prude or something, some other similar bad word gets attached to her, right? And so how can she, how is she supposed to sort of go through school navigating between these two extremes? And they're both no-win, right? If she does this, then she gets called this. If she does something else, she gets called that, right? And there was a second kind of no-win situation, Vera, that we were talking about. Do you remember what it was? There was that one, and then there was...
Successful and unsuccessful.
oh, right. Right. So girls in many countries are sort of being encouraged to, get an education, maybe enter science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM fields, right? So we're kind of pushing and encouraging young girls to go out there and be successful, which we definitely should. But of course, we're not really saying anything to young men, right? And so men are kind of threatened by some men are threatened by some women's success, right? So again, be successful, but don't be more successful than your husband, because otherwise that might be a problem, right? So again, women have to somehow navigate these, these two extremes, right? And it's a no-win situation for them. What else? Anything else? Right. We heard the culture or tradition argument, right? And so why are things this way? Why can't we do something different? Why can't I do this or do that? Well, this is just culture. This is just the way it is. This is the way we do things. And again, we said that culture is so strongly ingrained in us that sometimes it's hard to see outside of it. It's hard to see how things might be done differently, or it's hard to see things as things that we assume are kind of natural and the way things work are actually not that way. They're just the way we've decided we want them to be, right? And so, sometimes people will use culture and tradition as a premise, right? So why do we do things this way? Well, because we've always done things this way. Yeah, but that's not that's not good logical support for your argument, right? Humans have always murdered other humans, but is that a good thing to do? Definitely not, right? What else did we hear? sorry, you're wrong. Just teasing. I said, you said women are always wrong, so I was like, sorry, you're wrong. No, I'm teasing. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sabrina. You're absolutely right. So often, yeah, women have a lot of pressure put on them, right? They have these kind of, expectations that are placed on them in terms of childcare, in terms of sort of looking after the home, but also there's these new pressures in terms of being successful. And Vigdis, the girl from Iceland, was saying, but it's not even enough to be like medium successful. Like you have to do something big, right? Something important, which I think is probably something that a lot of people her age feel, but still she does feel that as a young woman. Women are made responsible for men's sexual behavior, which we talked about. In sexual relationships, there's a greater burden on women, right? Because if you're, in a relationship and the woman gets pregnant, the guy can, although he should not, but the guy can run away, right? And disappear and ignore what's happened, right? But for women, for obvious reason, that is not possible. You cannot run away from your own pregnancy, right? So women have a much greater burden in that regard as well, right? So it's not easy being a girl, right? Anything else? Right. Well, yeah, girls are soft and fragile, and they need to be protected by men. And so maybe I can use that question to sort of transition into number 2. Is there anything factual about that? Is that based in any sort of fact? Are women actually softer and in need of protection? Not a fact? Mm-mm.
It's a stereotype. It's just been socialized, I think, this way based on culture.
Yeah, we've definitely been socialized to see women as softer and weaker, right? We've also socialized them to express their emotions more freely, right? And so men have been socialized, at least in Western culture, not to do that, right? So something horrible happens, right? And the woman is like, bah! Right? She cries about it, and the guy's like, that's okay, dear, right? Who looks like the stronger one? The man does, right? Does that mean he's necessarily stronger? No, he's just been encouraged to disconnect and not express his emotions, whereas the woman has been encouraged to express them, right? So again, we've got social messages that reinforce other social messages, right? We've got messages that women are supposed to be soft and need to be protected, but then we teach men and women to behave in such a way that it looks as if that's the case, right? So some social messages reinforce other ones, and again, it makes it look like it's reality, right? It makes it look like women are actually the weaker ones, the softer ones, right? Other messages that are based in some kind of fact. Messages that are not based in any kind of fact.
Tradition and culture.
Right. So the defense of tradition or culture, or basically any cultural norm or value or socialization, most of those things are made up, right? We've just agreed that we want men to be this way, right? Are men the hunter and they chase around women? Well, maybe they do, but they do that because that's how society has decided to raise young men, right? What else that is not based in fact? Okay, that is not a fact, right? Women do not simply dress up and make themselves pretty for men. They do it for other reasons. Which is like, I'm still reeling from that realization. But yeah, so the I guess the idea that women have other things to talk about than just men.
They have like other things to think about. Like just by dressing up, that doesn't mean that the intention is to get attention from guys or something like that.
Right.
For themselves or their friends or I don't know.
Right. But and there's kind of stereotypes kind of worked in there too, right? Because if we see a woman dressed really sexy, what do we assume about her? Yeah, I think you were thinking something else maybe, but yeah, good word though. Yeah, so she's promiscuous, right? Yeah, she's kind of a certain type of person who does certain types of things, right? And so it's not just someone who's dressing up to make themselves feel good or maybe to impress a particular guy. We have, this stereotype that we know what she's like, right? And again, it's not true, right? Stereotype. Anything else you want to add in here in terms of messages based in fact or not based in fact?
I mean, these are all messages and social rules and no social, social norms are not based in fact, so I don't think there will ever be anything.
Yeah, or in some cases maybe it's just tough to separate out, right? Socialization and culture is such a strong dictator of human behavior that it's very difficult to separate out what we do and don't do naturally, right? Let me jump to the fourth question here. So this is kind of the million-dollar question here for this documentary anyway, but what is standing in the way of women being equal to men? What is stopping this process from happening?
Even if one person wants to change, there are other people who want to protect the old stereotypes, so it's not really happening in some parts.
Right. So.
Of like culture, like and tradition. Like some people are like, whose dad was it? Ruby's dad, where he believes it's like from it's taught in his religion to kind of preserve that, because he said he doesn't really want to associate himself or his family members to liberal other families.
Right.
Which is like not always the case, and I think that's when it comes to more of like his preferred preference.
Right. So there's kind of there's always a struggle in culture, right, between people who want to maintain existing traditions, right? They want to maintain the status quo. They want to kind of keep things the way they are. And then there's people who want change, right? They want things to be a little bit different, right? They see things that have happened in the past and they want to do things better in the future. And sometimes you see these groups play out in different ways. Sometimes, I'm going to use binary opposites here, sometimes it's kind of the old and the young, right? The older generations tend to be a little more conservative and traditional. Young people tend to be more, experimental and interested in change, right? You can see that split in pretty much any country between the countryside and the city, for the most part, right? The countryside tends to be a little more conservative. The city, the urban environment tends to be more kind of progressive and accepting of change. If you look at the political spectrum, which I don't think we've done in this class, if you look at the political spectrum, people on the right, conservatives or Republicans in the United States, they tend to be more traditional and less accepting of change. And then people who are on the left, liberals or Democrats, tend to be more accepting of change and want to kind of move things forward into the future in a different way. So you can kind of see that push and pull between for culture change exist in a bunch of different ways, right? But that's always going to be the case, is that some people are going to be, saying, no, we should do things the old way, we should keep our traditions are who we are. And then there's people who are like, no, we don't like that anymore, we want to do something new, right? And I think we can see that very clearly in the stories of Mira and Shui Shui, right? This pull between tradition and sort of, what younger people want to, how younger people want to imagine their lives, right?
Does that have a connection with how there was like, when we talked about the prejudice against women with the magazine cover,
Mm-hmm.
and people were commenting like, oh, you're just like, that's like not healthy and stuff. Well, like what they're actually saying, they're just like being prejudiced against women with like they're just body shaming there's like a hidden like message behind it. Same thing with like how conservatives like comment on how like this whole like changing the stereotype of like women's like where they stand is also the same thing as like them just wanting like men to be higher than them.
Yeah, lots of arguments for tradition, at least ones that are connected with sexism, yeah, are not so much maybe about tradition, but about maintaining power, right? Or people kind of rejecting discomfort, right? And so you can see that. Think about the successful woman, right? The successful wife who makes more than her husband, right? And so the young man in Lesotho said, "No, I can't do that." You know, that he didn't say this, but that challenges my masculinity, that challenges my identity. What am I good for if I'm not a provider? I just can't accept that, right? Whereas in this very room, we had a few young men who were like, that's great, right? We're going to pool all our money. We're going to have, you know, lots and lots of money, and we'll be able to live a great lifestyle. Woo! Jackpot, right? Won the lottery, right? So there's kind of some different perspectives there, right? But it's true, some people will use tradition to want to maintain their power, right? And so that could happen in any sort of social group situation or dominant minoritized group. But definitely men might want to call on tradition or call on maintenance of culture in order to maintain their sort of comfortable position of power, and might call on religion as well if religion is part of it, because speaking from there's lots of stuff in certainly in the Judeo-Christian tradition, there's lots of stuff that you can pull from the Bible or from the Torah or from the Quran that can support your view that men should be dominant over women, right? It's very easy to pull parts from those books and use them as evidence for that, right? And so sometimes that happens as well. What else? Standing in the way.
Negative stereotype about feminists. Like instead of asking for equalities, many people think that feminist people asking for privilege.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not many for no reason. Not many women want to stand for their community.
Right. So there are negative stereotypes surrounding feminists, right? So people who are standing up for women's rights, often there's negative ideas around them, right? So when you hear the word feminist, you're like, oh, here we go, right? Here we go with this thing again. But again, who does that belief benefit? Men, right? Because it discredits feminism and feminists, right? They're not allowed to, even Vigdis, who probably is a feminist, right? She's clearly in favor of equal rights for men and women. She doesn't even want to label herself that way because she thinks it will be negative, right? And we've even heard some of those things leveled at people who are protesting for other things too, like Black Lives Matter, right? Some people have spoken out and like, oh, haven't we heard enough of this? Why are we talking about this still? Why are you painting Black Lives Matter on streets? Don't all lives matter? Blah, 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 right? And so you hear people, again, kind of pushing back against activism, right? There's an inequality or an injustice. Some people step up and say, hey, we need to fix this. And then there are others who will push back and try to make them seem illegitimate or greedy or troublemakers or something. Right? Do you want to add? You okay? Am I okay? Okay. Anything else? Standing in the way? Culture, tradition, people who want to maintain tradition. You might want to put religion in there because religion is not often very open to change, right? Religion tends to be something that's heavily based in tradition and difficult to modify. Socialization, social messaging, the media, right? All of these things can stand in the way because they maintain things the way they, or they want to maintain things the way they are. Daniel says history might be standing in the way as well, right? And so certainly this inequality between men and women is historical, but also sometimes we use history to justify why things are the way they are now and why they're okay, right? Why we shouldn't change anything, right? Okay, let me move on here a little bit. Oh yeah, that thing. Okay. So what I wanted to talk about, just to kind of extend some of these things and maybe give a little more context to that question of what stands in the way of women being equal to men, I just wanted to talk a little bit about women's suffrage. Do you know what that means, suffrage? It sounds like suffering, but it's not. Suffrage? No. Suffrage is kind of the right or the ability to vote. And so here in the US and here in Canada, women haven't always had the right to vote. Of course they do now, but it was a right 100 years ago or so, maybe a little more, 110 years ago, that was actually denied to them. And so in the past, in Canada, in the US, only men could vote, only men could run for office. And again, that changed, but it wasn't an easy change, and it wasn't a quick change either, because like we've just mentioned, there were a lot of things standing in the way of women doing this, okay? So what I'd like to do is, because you probably don't know anything about the history of women's suffrage in the US and Canada, I just want to watch a short little video to kind of give us enough background knowledge to talk about this, okay? So it's just a short video. It's about 2 or 3, well, maybe it's 4 or 5 minutes long. And again, what I'd like you to pay attention to this video is basically the same question I just asked you about a minute ago. What was standing in the way of women's right to vote, and how did they actually win through? How did they achieve this right to vote? Okay, so just 2 very easy things to think about while we watch. Okay, and so for online people, this is posted in Microsoft Teams, so the 2 questions and the YouTube link is posted there. So we'll just switch over, we'll watch the video, and then we'll come back and talk about this, okay? So go to Microsoft Teams, watch the video, think about those 2 questions while you watch, and then we'll come back and discuss, okay? Okay, so we are back. What did we hear about there? So this is kind of the story of women gaining the right to vote in Canada. What was kind of originally standing in the way of these women?
Stereotypes that women should be at home.
Right? So we heard about stereotypes and beliefs that the place of women was in the home. Yep. What else did we hear?
Stereotype women are so emotional.
Right. So the stereotype that women are too emotional for the political arena, right? Right. You can't have people arguing in Parliament and then having a woman cry, right? You can't have that happen. Gosh. being silly here. Yeah, so the women were seen as too kind of emotional, maybe too soft for the political arena. What else? Yeah, so the law is standing in their way, right? Yesterday I think I told you about Emily Murphy's appointment as a magistrate in Alberta, but as it turned out, the law did not define her as a person, right? Which is unbelievable and shocking, but true. And then here we saw the law expressly forbids women from voting. It says no women shall vote. So it's not like, oh, they forgot to include women. It's that they purposely said no. What else is standing in the way here? Men? Yeah, men are definitely standing in the way, right? Men are opposing. Why are they opposing it? So we heard there's some stereotypes about women being in the home. We heard some stereotypes about women being kind of too soft and emotional. What else are these men using to support their argument that women should not vote? To maintain their power. I guess they do kind of clearly state that, right? They said that it was a woman's, I forget what the quote was, but it was a woman's place to be submissive or subordinate to a man. Yeah, there was a "thy shalt" thing, so I think it's probably a biblical passage, I would imagine. Which leads me to another thing, right? What else were they using as support for that argument? Religion, right? There was lots of Bible about, women. Woman was created for the man, men were not created for women, which is pretty interesting, right? So they're using scripture, right? They're using biblical teachings to support this idea that women should not vote. There was one other thing too, a scientific thing they mentioned. A scientific theory or paradigm that starts with an E. Vo. Yeah. Yeah, they mentioned the idea of evolution, right? And so Darwin's theory of evolution was, in existence at that time. People came to learn about it. They liked it. It revolutionized the scientific world. His theories on natural selection and evolution. But here they're using it and they're saying, hey, it's evolution, baby, right? The men are the stronger ones, and so, we should be in charge. And when women evolve to be stronger, then we'll let them be in charge too, right? He said, because that's what he's saying, right? He's saying that this is just, the law of evolution, and, it's God's will. So he's kind of mixing the biblical stuff with the scientific stuff, and we shouldn't hurry it along, right? We shouldn't do anything to impede natural progress here. Anything else? Anything else standing in women's way? Not that that's not enough.
They were afraid that women would be superior to them if they had the right to vote, so they would be selected as, you know what I mean here?
I think so. Yeah. They're kind of, I guess, afraid to lose their power, right? They're afraid to sort of be pushed out of the decision-making chair, right? Which is probably true of any one or any group that's in power, right? Once they're in power, they fear the loss of that power, right? How did these women finally achieve the right to vote?
It started off with people, with women that are like the upper class ones, and they own properties and stuff. Those are the first ones that were allowed to vote.
Right.
And then I think that started off to be provincial.
Yeah. So there's some women are given the right to vote at the provincial level a little bit earlier, right? But how do they achieve that? You might have to read between the lines a little bit, but how do they achieve that?
First the nurses have
Right. So there's a little bit of that's going to come later, though. That's for the federal right to vote, and maybe maybe they didn't state it quite so clearly here, but women are kind of protesting and sort of getting the word out, right? So they're marching in the streets. They've got signs and banners. They're giving public speeches saying women should get the right to vote. Come on, ladies, let's do this for the country or whatever, right? So they're having lots of public events. They're speaking, they're marching, they're walking around with signs saying, you know, women deserve the right to vote and things like that. They're talking to male elected members of the legislature saying, hey, you should give us the right to vote. And some men are going along with this, right? Because remember when they said in Ontario that every year a bill to allow women's suffrage was presented? So every year some man was doing that, right? Some man was stepping up and saying, I propose that we give women the right to vote. And, you know, at first the other men laughed it down, right? But eventually it actually gets passed, right? So again, there's a lot of effort on the part of women to raise awareness and to make the issue publicly known, but it also takes a few men, right? Because men are the ones who are in power, and somebody has to put this before the legislature and say, hey, you know, this is what we should do. Oh yeah, so what's the story then, Anna, behind the 1917 federal, how do women gain the right to vote federally? There's kind of, yeah, there's a political ploy going on here, right? So Borden is the prime minister during the war. Initially, lots of young Canadian men volunteered for the war, but as the war went on, lots of guys were getting killed and fewer people were volunteering, right? And so Borden knew that he was going to have to conscript soldiers. He was going to have to make it legally required that you go to war. But that was a pretty unpopular measure, right? And so he instead decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give women who have a man overseas, whether it's their son or husband or brother or whatever, I'm going to give them the right to vote. And so they, of course, will want me to bring in conscription because they'll want me to send more people over there to help their men, and I will win the election.
And nurses that was helping with the war also get the right to vote.
Right, and nurses as well. So again, a bit of a political play, right? He's gonna give the vote to people who will want him to send these troops overseas to help out their men and to help out the nurses over there. And it works, right? Those women do get the right to vote. They do vote, and they vote for him, right? And he wins, and he thanked them. So pretty transparent, right? And so, you know, it's kind of funny. I was thinking when I was watching that, you know, Trump is trying to appeal to the housewives of the U.S. And, oh yeah, housewives of the U.S., you love me, don't you love me? But, you know, what has he done for them? Zibola, right? At least Robert Borden did something for these women, right? He did give them the right to vote, and they did love him for it, or at least they voted for him, right? But so again, it's a bit of a political play here, but it does work. It does, you know, allow more conscripts to go over and fight in World War I, and it gives women the vote. And over time, more and more, you know, those boundaries are kind of expanded, right? So once some women have the right to vote, then a little bit later, other women have the right to vote as well, and eventually.
And after that, like, women start saying, like, well, we've done a lot during the war, and, like, we've helped, like, a lot of nurses went to war as well, like, why don't we have the right to vote now?
Right.
Like, actually, like, consistently voting.
Yeah.
And then that ended up being a thing, but then that didn't include everyone in general, because there were still people that was left behind.
Right. And so I'll mention that a little bit later, but yeah, it's important to remember that when women get the right to vote in Canada, we're talking basically about white women. We're not talking about women of color. We're not talking about Chinese women or Japanese women or South Asian women or Indigenous or First Nations women. They don't get the right to vote until much later. Yeah, in some cases, I think for Indigenous women, I think it's the mid-1960s. So again, this is a big victory for women back in 1917 and a little bit earlier, but again, not all women will gain this right, right? Some women it will be denied for decades, even for decades afterwards. Okay, you want to take a little break? Yeah, me too. Okay, let's take a little break. We'll come back in 10 and we'll talk just a little bit more about this. Okay. And we're back. So, women's suffrage, George. Women's suffrage. So, as you can see, women fought for the right to vote as it was originally denied to them in Canada and the US. The American kind of process is similar but different, right? So, women did gain the right to vote roughly around the same time as well, but of course the circumstances were a little different. As we mentioned, Prime Minister Robert Borden sort of made a political play to get elected again, which worked for him. But again, that sort of, what's that? It's not a, yeah, it was.
Whoever advised him to do that.
Well, it's pretty transparent, right? But sometimes transparency works, right, John Horgan?
Is he still alive?
John Horgan? The Premier of British Columbia? I think so. Who were you? Robert Borden? Yeah, long dead. That picture was probably taken. The pictures were probably taken in 1917, and he was probably 60 then. So he was probably born in like 1850 or something. So he's well dead, well dead. So yeah, a bit of a political play here, but it works out and it gives some women the right to vote. But in terms of like what's standing in their way and in terms of how they got this right to vote, we should probably keep in mind that yes, women had to fight for this, right? The minoritized group had to fight for rights that the dominant group already had, right? And everyone was asking, well, why should women get the right to vote? Do they have to earn it by sort of volunteering for the war effort? Do they have to evolve more so that they can be as logical and as strong as men? Why do they have to earn what men are just given, right? But unfortunately, that's just the way it works, right? They did have to work hard. They did have to petition the government and protest and demonstrate and speak in public in order to get people to get behind this idea, right? But also keep in mind that part of dominant group and minoritized group status is that the dominant group has control of society's institutions, right? So here, even in this short video, we see that men had control of a lot of institutions that worked together to deny women the ability to vote, right? Women couldn't give themselves the right to vote because they didn't have institutional power. And so while women worked very hard, they also needed the help of some men who would give them a platform, right, would give them space to speak, or would actually introduce these bills in the first place saying, I think we should give women the right to vote, right? So they did need some allies in the dominant group in this case. But yeah, men controlled all of these different social institutions, right? Government, the media, the economy, religion, medicine, education, all of these things are controlled by men. And they all kind of worked together in order to transmit men's prejudice into all these institutions and into society. So their prejudice that women weren't capable or desirable in the political sphere. And they sort of were able to spread their prejudice that a woman's place was really in the home, right? Whether you looked at the Bible, whether you looked at evolution, all of these things taught that women's place was in the home. And men were able to kind of transmit that prejudice throughout society, right? And even scientists were going along with this, right? Psychologists were speaking up and saying, actually, you're correct, right? Women are the frailer, inferior member of the species, right? Scientists apparently were backing up men's prejudice because, of course, shocker, scientists were men, right? Clergy, people who were in the church, priests and bishops and all those guys, they were preaching that a woman's place was in the home, right? This is what God wants. And, if women become involved in politics, what will happen to the families and the children, right? Women will suddenly ignore their children for the political sphere, and then, the entire country will go to hell because who will be raising our children, right? So they spread their prejudice that way too. Psychiatrists based their definitions of mental health on male norms for emotions and rationality. And so the normal thing was to not be emotional and to be logical and rational. But of course, all this time we've been encouraging women not to be that way. We've been encouraging them to be more emotional. But with men as the dominant group, they're the ones who get to define what's normal and what's not normal, right? Yeah. In history, if you went to, I think Daniel mentioned this, history. In history, hey guys, you're not with me at all here, are you, George and Sean? What are you doing back there? Because it's not this. You have two screens going on. Good thing I put booze in my coffee this morning. I didn't, but
It'll be good.
necessary. History teachers taught history from men's perspective, right? And history was, and to some degree almost still is, a history of old white men, right? And so again, we're attempting to change that, but in the past, that's what history was, right? So men had the power, the institutional power, to transmit their prejudice through society, and it was transmitted from all of these different places, right? And so most people, in fact, believe that women shouldn't be involved in politics. Most men believe this, and shockingly, a lot of women believe this as well, right? Because again, even the minoritized group absorbs social messaging, and sometimes they come to believe it. And so these suffragettes, as they were called, when they were fighting for the right to vote, they had to convince men that they should be able to vote, but they actually had to convince women as well, because lots of women felt that no, there was nothing wrong. That's a man's world. My place is here. That's their place over there. If I have political views, I'll just tell my husband and he'll vote, right? And so lots of women didn't see this as a particular problem. Lots of women didn't feel oppressed. And so, again, these suffragettes had to convince men and convince the government and convince the church, but also had to convince other women that something was wrong and that they should have the right to vote as well, right? Also keep in mind here that even though some men may have agreed with these suffragettes, so they might have said, yes, I think women should have the right to vote, even though they're not allowed to, those men are still benefiting from the fact that women can't, right? So again, when you're in a dominant group, when you're in an oppressive relationship in society, you benefit from the fact that others are oppressed, whether you agree with that fact or not. And so that's very true of everyone in a dominant group. It's true of me, right? I benefit in a number of ways for belonging to the social groups that I do in this country. Doesn't mean I agree with that, but I acknowledge that that is the case, right? And so even if we look at some statistics, even from the present day, we see that there's still a pretty big inequality in terms of political participation for women. And so, again, women have the right to vote in the US and in Canada, just, there's no gender discrimination there. But if you look, only 19% of House and Senate seats belong to women, right? They are a pretty significant minority considering there are 50% of the US is women, at least, right? Here in Canada, it's 52%. So us guys are actually in the minority here in Canada. But in the US, only 19% of Congress or the Senate are women, right? The Supreme Court, although this has actually changed a little bit now because they've just confirmed Amy Coney Barrett. Yeah, they just confirmed her the other day, but of course actually maybe it hasn't changed because she replaced Ruth Bader Ginsburg, another woman, so.
Yeah, so it's just like changing the person.
Yeah, changing the person and their sort of political leanings, right? But still, only 33% of the Supreme Court are women, right? Only 18% of city mayors are women. Only 8% of state governors are women, right? And again, we've still never had a female president. Not we, they. They have never had a female president, right?
We never had it.
Really? We did, actually.
Really?
For a short time, we had Prime Minister of Canada was Kim Campbell. She wasn't in for a super long time, but we have had a female prime minister. She was in the 1990s. I'm just going to Google that right now, actually. Well, again, we don't talk about her very much, which is interesting, right? So the Right Honourable Kim Campbell, 19th Prime Minister of Canada. Maybe I'll show you this, actually. There she is.
For 4 months.
The Right Honourable Kim Campbell. Oh, I guess you can't see all of that. Hey, hang on. Only for 4 months.
For 4 months? Why?
Still counts.
It's supposed to be like 4
What
months.
happened there in these 4 months?
Still counts.
For 4 months?
She's the only prime. So she served 132 days in office. Let's just see. She's from BC, from Port Alberni. I didn't know that. Political career, politics. I can't really read that. Elected in the 1988 federal election as an MP. Oversaw justice portfolio. Prime Minister. Sorry, I'm just going to move this because I need to read it. Mulroney, statutory federal election, then his popularity had declined. Oh, was it a confidence vote? She began running. Did she lose her riding? Sorry, I should do this. I'm going to look it up later because I can't read it very well. I can't read it. Maybe we can talk about it tomorrow. Sorry, it's just I've got other stuff on my screen and I can't see it. But yeah, we have had a female prime minister in Canada here for a short period of time anyway.
Officially, she's in the office for 4 months.
That still counts.
No,
If you're
not officially.
if you're prime minister, you are prime minister. There's no like, what's that? I gotta read it. I don't remember what her story was. So,
4 months?
okay, 4 months still counts. It's longer. It's longer than I've been prime minister. Probably longer than you have too.
Or ever will be.
Well, you never know. You're young still. You could be Canada's second woman prime minister.
I don't even have Canadian citizenship.
Not yet. In Canada, women make up 52% of the population, like I mentioned. And in 2015, and I think Justin Trudeau has maintained this, he committed to the fact that he was going to have a 50-50 gender balanced cabinet. And so his cabinet is not the thing he keeps his cereal in. His cabinet is, that's a bad joke. It's really bad, right?
Dad joke, that was so bad.
I've got all the dad jokes, and I didn't think I did, but it's recently been pointed out to me that all of my jokes are dad jokes.
Just kidding.
Oh,
Thanks for failing me this class.
oh, it's too late. You're done now. Yeah, I've come to realize that all my jokes are dad jokes, but I think I'm just going to lean into it.
You're just a quirky guy.
I'm just a little bit, right? And I'm not 20. That much is obvious. So maybe I just kind of lean into it and accept it, right? You laughed, right? Did you not? Okay, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. Anyway, his cabinet are kind of the heads of government, right? So the heads of all of the government ministries, those are the guys and girls in Justin's cabinet. And Justin said, I'm going to make that a 50-50 split. I'm going to make half women, half men, which is great, and he did that. But still, only 26% of MPs are women. So women elected to the federal government to sit in Parliament in Ottawa, only 26% of those are women. And again, only 28% of city councillors are women. Only 18% of mayors are women in Canada. And so this is a little bit concerning because if you talk to the UN will say that you need at least 30% of your government to be women for women to have a meaningful voice, to have enough presence to kind of get their way, right, to get their voice heard. And so in all of these cases, we see that women are part of government, right? And so, but their numbers are not high enough for them to have a meaningful voice according to the UN. And again, if you look at Canada and the US in terms of their government representation or their representation of women in government, you'll see that the US and Canada are pretty low on the list, right? And a lot lower than you might think, because many people would look at Canada and the US and say, oh, well, we have reasonable equality here between men and women. Maybe not perfect equality, but it's getting there, right? But if you look at this rating, you'll see that, actually that's not really the case. We're well down the list, and the US is number 100. So that's way down there, which is not a good sign, right? Especially when, if you look at some of the countries that are much higher on the list, some of those countries are not countries that you would expect to be there, right? You would not expect Rwanda to be number 1 in terms of women's representation in government, right? You would not expect Algeria or Afghanistan to be higher on the list than Canada and the US, right? And so I'm not saying anything negative about Algeria or Afghanistan or Rwanda. I'm saying good work, you guys, and Canada and US should probably take notice of this, right? Because I think we might think we're a lot higher on this list, and I think we might want to be a lot higher on this list, but for some kind of elusive reason, we are not, right? We don't have a lot of female representation in government, even though women are equally allowed to vote and equally allowed to run for office, right? So again, oppression isn't about numbers. It isn't about majorities and minorities. Because again, women are the majority in Canada, and they might be in the US as well. But it's about who holds institutional power. And those statistics tell us that men are the ones that hold governmental power here, not women. And to the point where we don't even pass the threshold, the minimum threshold for women to have a voice in government in both of these countries. And again, that should be a little bit of an alarm bell for us in Canada, right? Because I think we like to think of ourselves, and we want to think of ourselves as gender equal, right? Or reasonably equal. But again, the numbers don't tell that story, right? The numbers tell a different one. Okay. Any questions about that? Questions, concerns, comments, jokes, things you want to say, things you don't want to say, but might say anyway? Anything? Anything?
There was a girl in our country who was, I don't know, 16 or 17, somewhere in between. So her father was very religious and kind of things, and they were, I think they were in countryside, cities, yeah. So her brother and stuff, they were so controlling over her. So she tried to run away with her boyfriend, but then after her father and brother caught her, then they wanted to like control her, but then they couldn't, and so one day the father just woke up and cut her throat.
Oof.
And yeah, said that I don't want my reputation to be ruined over her. It's just better if she's dead than my reputation.
Yeah. So that's honor killing is what it's called, right? And so do you want to talk about that a little bit? Not right now, but do you want to talk about it?
Sure.
Sure? Okay. So yeah, that's another expression of, and that's very connected, well, it's obviously connected to sexism and oppression. It's obviously violence against women. It's connected to some of the things we were talking about the other day about women being conflated with property rights, but also with kind of family honor as well. Those things become connected. Yeah, we can definitely talk about that because it's connected to all of this stuff. So we could talk about that. And it's, that story very sadly is not an isolated incident, right? There's a lot of honor killing that goes on, but it often gets unreported, or it gets reported as something else. It gets reported as an accident or a suicide when it's.
His father never got caught by the police.
Yeah.
He was released after, although her brother had girlfriends too, but because she had a boyfriend, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, there's a big difference in terms of punishment for men and women, right? So both of these kids were kind of breaking the rules, and yet she suffers a far worse punishment than the brother does, right? And of course, we're getting a little bit deeper into this than I meant to, but yeah, and often the police are complicit in this because, of course, police are from the same cultural background and sort of have the same cultural values. And of course, are police usually men or women? Men, yeah. So often these kind of killings get reported as suicide. Often the police kind of know what's going on, but they don't investigate it because they agree with what's happened, and so they say, yep, it was a suicide, and they write it down, and then that's it, right? There's no investigation, there's no charges, and family members just continue with their lives, right? But yeah, we can talk about that a little more. It's it's a bit of a depressing subject, but it's worth talking about for sure. Okay, I think I'm probably going to leave it there for today, because Thursday's always a tiring day for everybody. I'm a little tired, and so, what's that? Clearly from last night. Yeah, I went to bed at 9:45. Late. No, it wasn't. Oh my God, it wasn't so much the lateness. It was the fact that I had to be like focused on actually doing something. Yeah. Okay, so that's it for today, online people.
That's it?
Good work. We'll see you tomorrow, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. Goodbye.